Waking up in the morning, gotta thank God. I don't know, but today seems kind of odd. No barking from the dog, no smog, and Jamie cooked a breakfast full of hog. Welcome, everybody. And today, Richard is going to join us, and of course, we'll give him the floor for as long as he would like to speak, and we'll have a civil, hopefully, flowing conversation. Richard, do you want to tell everybody who you are and where you publish your materials, or whatever kind of introduction you want to give?
Yeah, hi Jay.
Hey.
Yeah, thanks for finally actually get to talk to each other. I don't really know how to follow that. I can't rap. I'm part Italian.
There's a couple Italian rappers, aren't there?
I guess so. That's probably as colourful as I get. Okay, who am I? What do I do? So I guess I've been writing for different right-wing publications since about 2015, I want to say. Mostly, back then I was writing about libertarianism, and there was the alt-right pipeline and that sort of thing. So now eventually I put together a book that was published by Arctos. You'll probably be a bit familiar with them, Jay, I think.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
And so my attempt there was basically just to steer lots of guys away from paganism towards Christianity of some sort. I'm a Catholic. And also, just to get the libertarians to stop being libertarian.
Well,
we're
on common ground there. I agree with that.
Yeah, so I saw the other day some things you were posting. I was in hearty agreement with you there. That was my background there. I've been involved in a few debates where I'm talking. Mostly it's with pagans.
Yeah.
So the pagan guy, or you're probably familiar with this guy, Jason Reza Georgiani.
Oh yeah, I think that guy's a lunatic.
He doesn't like me. I wanted to be kind of civil and nice towards him. I think his views. It's kind of just like a rehashed Satanism, if you like.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Which is basically just a religious form of libertarianism. That's kind of how I got into talking about it, because it's like, this is just libertarianism. This is just individualism and egoism again. And so, I wrote something, and he just totally blew up. He wrote like this 7,000 word hate essay on me.
Wow.
I kept the receipts. I still got it. The website shut down, but I still got it. It's pretty crazy. So I just end up in conversations with people like that. I'm really just a normal guy. I'm just a writer. My knowledge of Christian history is, I don't think anywhere near yours at all. But we were talking recently. I was talking about me as a Catholic. How can I have certainty about Catholic dogma?
Before we go into that, can I ask you, were you raised Catholic, or did you convert?
I grew up in a very nominal Catholic house. So my gran, as I said before, my gran was Italian. I was baptized. I don't think there was any effort really to confirm me. My cousins, my godparents, but they don't even talk to me really anymore. Pretty much just because I became a Christian, and when I was in my teenage years. I suppose maybe around 19. I had been interested in religion. I was reading different religious texts, and I read the New Testament. I guess I was just a Protestant pretty much for a few years. I became a very serious Calvinist
Well, we have common ground. I did the same thing.
Yeah. So I understand. I seem to remember seeing something about that about you. Must have been a couple of years ago or something. I think a lot of people took that path. I mean, I think if you look at a lot of YouTubers like Catholic or Orthodox, like Christian influencers, but they seem to have been Calvinist for some time. I don't know what that is. I don't know why that kind of happened that way. I think maybe there was a lot of disillusionment with traditional Christianity. I think people were trying to return to tradition, quote unquote, and so they were falling back into Christianity, but then they were actually quite intelligent guys, so they became serious about doctrine. And Calvinism, it has its consistencies internally, and so I kind of think that's what that was about. But same kind of thing with libertarianism, I guess. That's not really a thing anymore. I think everyone's moved on from that.
Right.
But in terms of orthodoxy, I'm going to have to, admit my ignorance a little bit here, which is a bit of a shame because, I've had lots of Orthodox friends. I've kind of written alongside Orthodox guys. I have had theological discussions like with Orthodox friends and things like that. My knowledge is kind of poor, though, I would say. I've tried to look into things like the energy essences distinction, Palamas, things like that. It's fascinating, but I think a lot of people would agree with me in saying I just don't have the time to do like a deep dive on stuff like that. Generally, though, my feelings about orthodoxy are very, very positive. I suppose I kind of agree with, I don't want to diverge too much here, I kind of agree with the sort of, there's a geopolitical thinker called Igor Panarin. He's like the dean of some foreign policy college in Russia, and he's known for making these big like geopolitical predictions about the future, and he would kind of divide up Europe and the West, let's say, into two. He says really what you've got is kind of like the Anglo world, which he calls the Judeo-Protestant world. Which I think,
that's funny.
Some people would think, oh, well, that's really accurate. On the other side, he says you've got the Orthodox-Catholic thought, which he sees as being distinct from like the liberal West, if you like. And he's had quite an influence in Russia, but I kind of think that there's a lot of truth to that, and so just generally, I kind of have very positive feelings about orthodoxy, in maybe like a naive way. I'd love to see greater efforts towards reunification. Whether anything like that would be possible, I don't know, but I just feel positively about it. So that's kind of like an introduction to me, like what I know about orthodoxy, albeit very little. What I know about you, which is probably quite little. I remember seeing some videos of yours a while back about the Illuminati and Hollywood and things like that, and I was thought, oh, this guy's really smart, and it's really fascinating, and I can see like you've got a huge following, and it seems to be like a really entertaining guy. So
well, thank you, I appreciate that. So in the DMs we were talking about this issue of knowing dogma, and you said you'd like to chat on that. So I'll just lay out the premise of what we were discussing, and then I'll let you have the floor again. So basically, I was saying that, and this is an issue I brought up with multiple Catholics in the past few days, which is just, to me, it looks like if we were going to be in a church where it was going to provide the thing that is one of the top selling points, this idea that you're going to have certitude, you're going to get clarity, you're going to get finality to certain matters, and that's going to be through the office of the Supreme Teacher, the Supreme Pontiff, the Pope, etc. And the way that you do this. Where what I'm looking for is the dogma. The dogma is classified in basically three categories of extraordinary magisterium, universal ordinary magisterium, the first two of which are promised to be guided by the Petrine charism of infallibility. And by extension, I think this means that the Pope is indefectible, meaning that he's not going to officially teach error for the whole church. He might privately hold an erroneous opinion or something like that. So we all agree we're not talking about his private opinions, but rather his public teachings and what he exemplifies in his actions as well. For example, he couldn't, sacrifice infants and hail Satan and still be a Christian, right? That would be an action of apostasy, as I understand Roman Catholic law defines it, and so forth. And so the third category would be the ordinary teaching, which, although is not necessarily infallible, my understanding is that a Catholic has to submit to it, quote, with docility. So you've got these three criteria, but my question, as we were discussing with Richard and I in DMs, my question becomes, I don't see how really the selling point is there if I'm not really in a better position than, say, a Protestant has only about this many thousand pages, we'll say about 3,000 or 4,000 pages to work through to derive dogma, so to speak, from. But a Roman Catholic has much more work to do because you've actually got about, we'll say, 10,000 pages if we include Denzinger, the papal encyclicals, the ecumenical councils, the Bible. If we total all that up, that's probably going to be, I'm going to guess, maybe 7,000 to 10,000 pages. I'm just wondering, like, how would I be in any better position than a Protestant? Because this is, again, the selling point that is often used by, I would say, most of the pop Roman Catholic apologists, that we have the magisterium. You don't have that in the Orthodox world. And so this is sort of a trump card. But my point is just this. If I've only got 3 broad criteria and I have this giant stack of stuff that I'm bound to, the 3 broad criteria really don't do much. They just kind of leave me in this sort of like, oh, okay, so I guess I better get to work. Now you might say, well, but that's not really practical. You've got the catechism, you've got this, you've got that. Yeah, but I'm not just bound by the catechism. I'm bound by the entire, quote, magisterium. So my point is that what appears at first to kind of be a simple trump card, right, against the Protestant or even the Orthodox, well, we've got the magisterium, we've got the Pope, we've got the simple answers, the solution. You guys are missing that, so you're missing a fundamental component that Jesus would surely provide to his church. And what I'm saying is that, well, if we actually look at this fundamental component, and I'm speaking myself from having been in the Roman Catholic traditional world for many years, back in my 20s, I don't actually think that this delivers on this promise at all. I think it's actually much worse, especially when we look at the controversies post-Vatican II. So that's sort of the topic that we laid out, and I'll let you say whatever you'd like.
Yeah, I was talking about a Protestant with this the other day. 'Cause they posted, and I mean, quite sort of, I don't know what they were trying to do with the post, maybe sort of like to spur other Protestants into action or something like that. But it was some quote from John MacArthur or something like that, and he was saying, like every single individual Christian is responsible for. I don't know what kind of doctrine it was, but basically just for determining different doctrines, and I mean I think that's exactly right. If you take a Protestant, which I think is a spiritually individualistic belief, if you take that view, then every individual is totally responsible for all that sort of thing. I mean, the problem I have with that is that that's just not how humans work. So, humans are, not just social animals. We're corporate animals. When we come into groups, those groups really do take on a life of their own. Not to be like that guy, like the empiricist sort of guy, but there's a lot of data showing this, and also as Christians, we shouldn't have a problem really believing that. Like we look at the church and we think, okay, this is a corporate thing. We come together, we are the body of Christ. Now, I mean, 80% of people, at least, are incapable of having original thought. They're not thought leaders. We have that expression, thought leaders, because we need people to lead us in thinking. A lot of people will just get their understanding of what is going on around them from the news. I know some people here in England, and you would have thought that a long time ago, people would have thought, we cannot trust the BBC for anything. Like, globally, people should understand this, and yet, I still encounter people who it doesn't really seem as though something is real to them unless it has been said on the BBC News. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. Now, when I look at the church, I think of it as, it must necessarily be a corporate thing. It's got to have the thought leaders and all the rest of it. And, to come to the point that you were raising there about how can you have the certainty, I think that the certainty really comes just from being a part of the church. I wouldn't say that necessarily... in the DMs we were talking before and saying, does there need to be like one specific list which is listing out and defining what has been infallibly taught? What specifically is the ordinary teaching, what specifically is the extraordinary teaching, and all of that. And I don't think that's the... I don't think that is necessarily what's missing or what's needed. I think what the Protestants are missing is that they are individualists, and so really John MacArthur is right for them. They are on their own, and they have to determine all the doctrine, absolutely everything for themselves to get it all right. They need to read everything through. I don't think that an individual Catholic, and I know some of them, and bless them, but they are just not smart enough to read and to grapple with and to get to grips with most of the magisterial teaching.
Well, let me ask it this way: do you think that the Roman Catholic papal magisterium does provide certainty for doctrines and dogma?
I do, yeah. I can speak for myself. And I can say that, I feel that there is certainty. I suppose in the DMs, I said something that would maybe help me understand your position a bit better would be if you could give me an example of something where you think, I should have some ambiguity, and maybe there's some.
Yeah, I can give. I can think of an example like the giving of communion to people who have been divorced. That was a notorious change that Francis allowed some years, I think 8 years ago. Or another example would be the alteration in the death penalty, which if you go back to, say, the time of the Council of Trent, the death penalty was considered part of natural justice. But by the time of Francis's argument, now John Paul II had already said he thought it was wrong and it shouldn't be there, and I think he made an alteration to the catechism, but specifically Francis has said, no, it's actually contrary to the gospel. So if it's contrary to the gospel, how could it have been a natural justice at the time of Trent?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Definitely the capital punishment one. As far as I can figure out, the debate is between those who are trying to uphold human dignity and those who are trying to uphold certain aspects of what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, do you admit that it was the normal practice, say at the time of Trent and before?
Of course, certainly. And I also see that there are some Catholics, and they're desperately trying to find some statement, and they do find some statements that are from. I can't remember that there was some pope and there was some statement, and someone shared this I found it. Some pope in the past saying that they thought that capital punishment was technically contrary to human dignity. But okay, but for something like this, I think, okay, so some debate has come up, okay, and let's say we're living in a different time or whatever, and so maybe for certain reasons you're thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this? Well, I don't see that there's as much of a problem with hashing it out and then saying, for instance, I mean, the way I read it is just that, okay, maybe there are some times, where maybe there are certain demographics and, there's a certain time period where we can say, okay, within a polity, it's right for them to be upholding human dignity.
Well, if that's the case, though, it wouldn't be a natural principle, right? Because if it's a principle of natural justice, for example, and I'm looking for the papal statement where at the time, right around the time of Trent, you had one of the popes not just believing in the death penalty, but it actually says homosexual priests should be put to death.
Oh, right. I mean, maybe Francis would agree with that. I don't know. He's a bit sort of back and forth on his.
Well, now hold on. Now he allowed the blessings of the couples, not the union, the couples, which was clearly not because the CDF in 2003, I believe, had issued a document saying that you can't bless the couples.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that one, but I mean, with regard to the death penalty, like I do think that there is a consistent view where you can say, yes, in times past, you can find statements in Christian history to say, like, ideally, we wouldn't have something like capital punishment, but capital punishment is a necessity.
Well, but what I'm saying is, like, and I found the quote here, it's the Apostolic Constitution of what you consider Pope St. Pius V of Trent, in his Apostolic Constitution calls for the death penalty for homosexual priests. So I'm wondering, how do we get from that to not only a large portion of the Novus Ordo Catholic priests being Skittles, but actually the blessing of those quote couples? Is that to me, this is just like a rank, flat out contradiction.
Well, I mean, that probably have something more to do with the Vatican itself, now having its own, like, technically, like, political authority there. So it might more be a case of, like, this is human law as it's supposed to be applied within, like, canon law, let's say, that aspect of canon law. So it's kind of politically within the church how they're handling that situation.
Well, but I thought I thought it was supposed to be clear, right? Like, I thought the magisterium would make these issues of faith and morals clear. And my point is that it doesn't seem to be making. I mean, it was very clear for centuries what the Catholic Church's teaching on the death penalty was, right? Why is it no longer clear?
Well, I mean, I think we're living in a time basically where we've got liberal hegemony around the world, and so anything that whiffs of eugenics or anything that whiffs of the slightest disrespect to human dignity is repugnant. And so I think that is probably what's brought this question to light. And so that's probably what has empowered the thinking of certain people. Francis, of course, like, he's notorious for wanting to rethink stuff in light of the latter half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
like war, and nuclear weapons and things like that. That's
well, and another example I could use of this is, if you go back to the ancient canons, and the canons of Carthage, for example, are accepted at the Sixth Trullo and the Sixth Council, and they note, for example, that if a priest goes in and prays with schismatics, heretics, or at a synagogue, and by extension a mosque as well, that canon was before the existence of Islam, but it would apply to Islam as well, because Muslims are obviously anti-Trinitarian. And you had mentioned that you find those things to be a bit scandalous as well. How can we get from it's an excommunicatable offense for a cleric to pray in a mosque or in a synagogue to calling crusades, Urban II calling crusades? You've got Pope Calixtus saying that it's the abominable sect of Muhammad, etc. And then the logic of Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium 16 is the very basis for why Francis goes and prays in a mosque towards Mecca, or Benedict goes and prays in a mosque towards Mecca. And I'm not just bringing that up to harp on just that, but you were asking for examples of things where, well, what are some examples of things that aren't clear? Well, it was very clear for many, many century millennia, East and West, you can't go do these kinds of things as a Christian. They're fundamentally immoral actions as a Christian. So my point is that if we read Mortalium Animos, the encyclical of Pius XI, it clearly says that these types of things, all interfaith gatherings, he says, are premised on indifferentism and are ultimately apostasy.
Well, I mean, I would say, I think the teaching of the church is still clear, where you have, like these political statements, because I kind of see them as being like political statements.
So what you're saying, Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate are political? I mean, they're saying that Muslims and Christians worship the same God.
Sorry, I meant where they go into, where you had what was the article? It said like Pope Benedict the 16th, wasn't it? And these Orthodox guys, and they were going to this mosque. I think it was Sola, I can't remember his name in full.
Well, let me give an example. Mortalium Animos, paragraph 10 says that the Apostolic See has never.
Yeah, but you see, I reckon that they were just, they found like some kind of loophole about it. So, I think in the instance you were talking about there, like someone else had said, oh, well, actually in that place, there's, supposed to be, according to tradition, John the Baptist's head is there. And so, okay, well, there's like a kind of loophole, and I think they did something similarly, didn't they? During
who has a loophole?
Assisi.
I'm not following you in terms of the loophole. I mean, yeah, I'm aware of Assisi and Assisi too, but what do you mean? What do you mean a loophole?
Well, I mean, the loophole there would be, in Assisi they had some people there, but like the Buddhists or whoever it was, they would go off to somewhere else and they would do their prayers separately. And so
okay, but Benedict is what's the loophole? Where's the loophole in Benedict praying together with the Grand Imam towards Mecca in the mosque? How's there a loophole there?
Well, I think the reason Benedict and some Catholics, and from what I could see of what was written on, I haven't looked into it, but there was some Orthodox there as well. I think that they were sort of doing their own prayer, and it was something, because John the Baptist's head was there, and so, they were kind of being allowed into the mosque
well,
to do something,
is that,
but it was not,
okay.
Like the Muslim call to prayer and that sort of
thing.
But they would do something like that, I think.
How is that right? But how is it a loophole though? If Mortalium Animos, for example, which is expressing the traditional teaching, says that you can't even participate in those assemblies at all.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think the Catholic position on those things is clear. And, the reason I think it's clear is because when they do these, quite bizarre things, some people would think that they are, wonderful and it's great and all of that. People say, oh, wow, how strange, you've got the Pope going and doing this. Isn't that, so everyone, Catholics.
Well, you're saying that, right. By the way, I agree that it's wrong for the Orthodox as well. But do you believe that the basis for this, for example, of the Abu Dhabi Faith Center where the idea is
Yeah.
that Muslims, Christians, and Jews all have the same faith. Don't you think that this is premised on what Lumen Gentium 16 says, that Muslims and Jews are together of the faith of Abraham and they worship the same God?
So, I mean, I think that Muslims and Jews, according to that statement, are in their intent trying to worship what we would understand to be God the Father.
Yeah, but the intention is not right, but intention was not what was the deciding factor in the thing that you admitted is the traditional teaching. So even though there might be individual Muslims that have a correct intention, public liturgical worship cannot be done in this way according to Mortalium Animos, expressing, as you said, the traditional teaching, because it gives the impression of indifferentism. In other words, it's a public action of faith that expresses that all of these are the same. So even if there were a loophole that secretly Benedict was praying privately to himself, the action itself is still a public action of apostasy.
Well, this is what I'm saying. So I'm saying, like, you know, the question is, like, is there clarity in the teaching about these things? I think that there is clarity in the teaching of these things, and
then you would have to
do these weird things.
Then you would have to condemn those actions as apostasy if the teaching is clear, correct? Wouldn't Benedict? Wouldn't Benedict and John Paul's actions fall under the condemnation of Mortalium Animos and the ancient canons if the teaching is clear?
Well, when you look into what they are doing, they are always trying to find some kind of loophole just so that they can get together with people of another religion.
But doesn't that express
something that isn't quite like?
Isn't that Talmudic though? I mean, isn't that right? I mean, Talmudic, isn't that the Talmudic approach that Jesus condemns? Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. I mean, let me ask it this way: did the martyrs of the first 3 centuries, did they find a loophole to where they could offer incense secretly to Yahweh while they're offering it to Caesar?
Well, no. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily. Like another one of the examples, for instance, was I think you showed something, and there was Francis, and he was praying with or next to, or however you would want to say it, some Buddhists, and they were doing like a chant or something. I mean, he was praying simultaneously. I don't know the instance, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but for example, just looking at something like that, my point is that someone would say, I didn't think that Catholics were supposed to be doing that, and that's what causes the scandal. That's why it appears to be scandalous.
You're saying
now,
that
what they then say afterwards is, or the way they've set it up, and within the context, they say, these Buddhists, they were simply doing a chant, or you could say, a proper understanding of Buddhism is that it doesn't quite fit the criteria of a religion in the sense that we would understand it. And so this is why you get
but Buddhism, right? But
and stuff
hold on,
like that.
But Buddhism, just like the way Pope Calixtus spoke of Islam and Pope Eugene spoke of Islam, he calls them horrible demonic faiths, and Buddhism is demonic as well. Whether they recognize a personal deity or not is really irrelevant to whether the philosophy is one that is demonic, and it absolutely is. We know from Scripture, multiple places, Psalm 106, the gods of the nations are devils. Psalm 95, Paul in 1 Corinthians 10:20, the gods of the nations are devils. So it's a demonic religion, even if the individual people are not inherently evil. We agree on that. But again, the purpose of the famous encyclical Mortalium Animos of 1928, which is ironic because this is only a few decades before the opening of the doors of Vatican II to all of this stuff, it's clearly condemned that and he's just talking about ecumenist projects with Christians. Mortalium Animos isn't even conceiving of doing these kinds of prayer meetings and religious celebrations that are with other
Sure.
religions.
Yeah.
This is just talking about Protestants and Anglicans and even Orthodox. And it says that it has never been allowed because it gives the impression of indifferentism. And it's just like when Aquinas gives examples of what would be sins of apostasy. One of the examples he gives in the Summa is if a Catholic were to go and revere the tomb of Muhammad, he says that would be an action of apostasy. And in Catholic canon law, to do those kinds of actions, it means that you're severed from the body of Christ. It means you're no longer a Catholic. It's the same penalty in Catholic canon law for when a person procures an abortion. If you get an abortion, you're late sententiae, immediately ipso facto excommunicated, and you're supposed to have the bishop forgive the sin for you to come back into communion. Now, most Roman Catholics don't enforce that, but the point is just simply that certain sins in Catholicism are considered immediate excommunications by the virtue of the action itself, and one of those is also apostasy.
Sure. I mean, I don't think any popes have revered the tomb of Muhammad or anything like that.
Oh, so wait. So praying towards Mecca is not the equivalent?
So, I mean, in that particular instance, which I haven't looked into, someone else also sent something along, and they said, okay, in this place, technically there's a relic of John the Baptist, and so, for me, okay, I don't know the ins and outs.
Well, I mean, I could if I'm a martyr in the 1st century, 2nd century, couldn't I say that? Well, if I face in that direction, at least 20,000 miles in that direction, there's going to be at least some relic. So I'm not actually honoring the image of Caesar, and so you don't have to martyr me because secretly I'm actually reverencing, a saint's relic that's 500 miles in that direction. I mean, in other words, this is like Talmudic sophistry.
I mean, my point is that, we were talking before about, can I have some clarity in what the church teaching is?
Well, so, and you admitted.
I can have some clarity.
Right, and the clarity is that,
what popes will do is to, because there is clarity about those things, I think this is why they then, have to, use these sort of political techniques, and they sort of say, well, maybe if we do an event that's a bit like this, and
but just to call them political is missing the fact that they're religious syncretist events. That's the point. I mean,
sure. I don't mean to, I don't mean to like hand wave away like any, the spiritual reality of these things, or the importance of these matters, like especially like for their individual souls. I'm not trying to dismiss that. Don't misunderstand what I'm trying to say there. I'm more saying that, like.
But aren't these the people that provide the clarity?
They might have good intentions about these things, whereas actually what they're doing is kind of being scandalous and all the rest of it, and they are trying to work around this stuff. But
see, we can never know their intentions, and that's why what we go by is the public actions. I can never know or judge anybody's interior state. Only they know those things, right? And God. So what we know and what we go by in the public sphere is what's called the public action, right? And that's why public actions like this tell me that anybody who has a love for Christ could never go into a situation of praying with and honoring the religion dedicated to Antichrist. I mean, John says if you don't confess Christ come in the flesh, you're of Antichrist. And Islam is like the greatest version of that, with 1 billion people pushing this. So it's unconscionable to me that you could think, not you, but I'm saying that Benedict could think, well, he's a Christian, but it's okay to do these actions. Now, even if he's sinning and he's, secretly had an intention to pray or whatever, let's grant that. The point is that how is the papacy providing the clarity when for the last 70 years, this is the type of stuff that's been promoted, because it's promoted in the Vatican II documents in Lumen Gentium 16 and Nostra Aetate, where it says, for example, Hindus also seek God in love like Catholics do. And if you ask many Catholic priests, like, do you think a Hindu and a Catholic worship the same God? They'll say, yeah, we all believe in God. However, they've got it kind of muddled up with certain things. So the point is that it's the natural theology, lowest common denominator stuff that is the basis for these actions of the Assisi gatherings and whatnot, and that's premised on what's in the Vatican II documents. So if it's in the Vatican II documents, it's not just a question of the political or geopolitical influences of the papacy, which I agree with, that they push this stuff for, political reasons. But there's also a more fundamental element that they're pushing it for political reasons because it's actually in the dogmas and the documents of Vatican II. And if that's the case, and I agree even that Vatican II had a geopolitical agenda behind it, you can read Wim Hof's book on that, then what that means is that Vatican II and Vatican I contradict each other.
I've heard the arguments about does Vatican II contradict Vatican I, and other people saying, well, it doesn't. Ultimately, I just think some of it was not very well written.
So it's ambiguous, but I thought you were saying the papacy's magisterium gives certitude and clarity.
The point is, it's not necessarily saying anything new. Where it's covering old ground, it's maybe not doing so particularly well. It's like omitting things, but that's not to say that that stuff wasn't already.
Well, what about the statements on Jews, for example? What about the statements on Jews, for example? Because Vatican II says that the Jews are the elder brothers in the faith, and that they have a valid reading of the Old Testament, etc. Is that the traditional Catholic teaching?
I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that, what it says. But, as far as I understand, the historical Catholic understanding of the Jews is that, since the coming of the Messiah, they have gone astray. That doesn't mean that.
Are they also of the faith of Abraham? Vatican II says that they're of the faith of Abraham, like the Muslims.
Well, yeah, they believe in Abraham. And
No.
Well,
atheists believe in Abraham, so that doesn't make you of the faith of Abraham. What is the script? Hold on.
Atheists I know don't even think Abraham was a real guy.
Well, plenty of them do, though. Is my point, right? So many people believe in the existence of Abraham. That doesn't make you of the faith of Abraham.
Yeah.
So you don't think that being Trinitarian is what makes you? Because Galatians says the only way to be in Abraham's faith is through Christ.
Yeah, so we're only really children of Abraham.
Okay, so then they're not of the faith of Abraham. There's no Unitarian God that Muslims, Christians, and Jews worship. It's the Trinity. That's the point.
Yeah, I think the intent is to say, and I believe this has always been the view of Muslims and Jews specifically, perhaps distinguished from some other groups like Hindus and that sort of thing, is that they believe that they are following in the footsteps of Abraham.
So all I have to do is, so I can believe whatever I want, and I'm of the faith of Abraham. Does Paul say that in Galatians? Paul says that the only way to be of the faith of Abraham and to be in the covenant is in Christ. So, but if I don't care about Christ and the Trinity, yes. If I think that I'm of the faith of Abraham, then it is?
No, sure. No, not like that. It's like, so they sincerely, in the same way that, Paul talking about the Gentiles is saying, they're reaching out, in the dark.
And he says they don't know God.
Yes, they don't really, because God, as we understand, is revealed in Jesus Christ.
That's the only God. That's why. Yeah, but see, now do you see why? Now do you see why the Trinity in the Old Testament is such a key element? Because it's not a new revelation at the time of Christ. It means that Abraham believed in the Trinity.
But you see, the point is that if you have contrary to, let's say, Hindus. Hindus, might have zero views about Abraham. Jews and Muslims, what makes them distinct, and I think that's pretty much all the document is. Well,
are you aware that Nostra Aetate includes Hindus as worshippers of the same God as well?
Well, yeah, I think it's I know.
Well, you just said
Platonists,
exclude Hindus.
and they believe in God. They believe in the God of Plato, and so much of the stuff that
so
they
all of
say,
the right, but none of
okay.
none of that is the Trinity. So it's not the same referent.
Well,
so they don't believe in our God. That's the point.
Not to be pedantic, but there are some Platonists, and they believe the Trinity in Christianity does make sense because.
But none of that is but that's an abstracted idea of God, and what I'm saying is that
exactly correct.
But that's not knowing or worshiping God, because the texts actually say that they seek God and adore Him in love and trust. So it's a capital G there. So do you think that Basil thought that, for example, Eunomius worshiped the same God as him, the radical Arian?
Sorry, say again. I missed that last bit.
Do you think that Saint Basil thought that the radical Arian opponent, Eunomius, do you think that he thought that Basil think that Eunomius worshiped the same God as Basil?
No, I mean, but he could probably say something. He could probably say something like, "You think that you know God. You think that you love God."
That's my point, and that they don't, and that's contrary to what you just said.
No,
you just said if they think it and they intend it to be sincere, then they do. You said that's what makes you of the faith of Abraham.
I'm saying that is what their faith is. It's wrong because
it's not faith in Trinity,
relationship with Christ. If they don't personally know Jesus, the person, Jesus Christ, and who He is, and if they are not.
Here's the point: there is no lowest common denominator thing called God that we all worship, and then we tack on Trinity. The only God is the Trinity. There is no other option. Let me ask it this way: when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees,
most humans believe in a creator, though.
It doesn't matter. It's still there. That's an idea.
I'm not saying that they're saved. I'm not saying that.
Well, I mean, Nostra Aetate is but it doesn't. No, situation. The point is that they're not worshiping the Trinity, and that's the only God. So let's bring this home to a very clear example in the book of John. When Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees who don't believe that He is the path to God, does Jesus say, "But you still worship the true God"? Or does He say that you don't even know the true God at all? What does He say about the Pharisees and the Father?
I'm trying to think of a statement, but...
So John 5 to 9, all of John 5 to 9, particularly John 8, they have this discourse and this debate, and He says, "You do not know the Father, you've neither seen Him nor known Him, you're the seed of the devil." So they're Unitarians in the exact same sense as Muslims and some of these other Unitarians. So do they count as worshipers of the true God?
Well, I mean, I think that, even though, He says they're in the seat of Moses, I think they were high priests doing stuff.
No.
I don't think
that's not what we're not asking. That's a deflection. That's a deflection. Do the Pharisees who reject the Son, do they know or worship the Father according to Jesus? He explicitly says they do not.
No, I mean, Jesus is quite clear that, in fact, because of their faults, their faulty understanding, their sin, and all the rest of it, they are in fact children of the devil, is what He calls them.
But He explicitly says you neither know that you.
God at all.
He says you don't know the Father or the Son. Yes. He specifically says you do not know the Father.
Yes, if they don't know them. They on the other hand think that they do. They think.
And does that matter? Is that acceptable to God at all? The fact that they think they know God? It's irrelevant.
It only matters to the extent that you can then start to have an open in order to be able to talk with these people.
No, you don't. That's all premised. That's all premised on natural theology.
Well, I mean, if you're having a discussion with a Muslim person, and then religion comes up as a topic. A good place to start, as with, any discussion where you think you are going to have some disagreements with someone, is where you agree with
but I don't start by saying that, well, we both agree on the same God. Now let's see about the person of Jesus, because they don't have the same God. You understand that Muslims, for example, most Muslims that you argue with, they actually remove multiple attributes. Like they don't believe in divine omnipresence. They don't believe in divine immanence.
I would say that they have a faulty understanding of God, yes. And in that sense, they can't know God personally in the way that we can, knowing Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but that's the only way to know God. And the point is that the Vatican II documents, the Vatican II documents go beyond abstract knowledge of a thing and say that they actually love him and worship him and adore him. Adoration is an action of worship, and that suggests that God accepts that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there were times in the Old Testament where people thought that, everything was hunky-dory and they were okay and they had a great relationship with God and everything was fine and everything was going to be okay. And it turned out to not be correct.
That's a false analogy to what we're talking about. We're talking about what the documents explicitly say about the adoration of the Muslims themselves towards, or the Hindus.
They love their idea of God, and if you ask them,
but that's not God.
What God are we talking about?
Do you understand that between Roman Catholics and Orthodox, this is a key point of departure, is that we're not worshiping an idea of God or an abstracted thing.
We are not. No.
That's
we know God personally.
It says, look, they do, but my point is that they do not adore the one God any more than the Pharisees adored the one God. And they're not of the faith of Abraham any more than the Pharisees are the faith of Abraham, according to Jesus and Paul. And it doesn't matter what they thought about their faith. That's irrelevant to whether it matches up, because Jesus says, you don't know him. It's not, what you're doing isn't working. So you gotta reorient your paradigm to where it begins with me, Jesus is saying to them, right? And they're like, we're not going to do that. We're going to stick with Moses, and we know God. We know the Father. And Jesus says, you neither know him nor have you ever seen him. That's what you should be saying to the Muslims and the Jews, not what Vatican II says, that the church esteems the Muslims because they adore the one God, merciful, subsisting in himself, the creator of heaven and earth, and they take pains to submit to his inscrutable decrees, just like Abraham. That's Vatican II. No, Muslims do not submit to God's decrees like Abraham, because Abraham worshiped the Trinity, and Abraham believed in Jesus, according to Jesus in John 5. Abraham rejoiced, or 5 or 9. Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and so I was glad. It's John 8.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the distinction is that I would see what the limited, very positive statements that are included in some of those Vatican II, or what do they call them? Those documents, I think they're were they declarations? I can't remember the term that they give to them. But in those,
how are they very limited? I mean, it's in Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium.
It's just these limited, very positive statements about.
Oh, so hold on.
Okay. Here are the big world religions.
So now we're at a key. Right, here's the thing. Here's the thing. We're at a key point of our original topic, which was clarity through magisterium. And when we go to these magisterial documents, which you said are there to provide this clarity and this certitude, now actually many of these parts you're saying are unclear. So how do I know when I'm reading these documents whether I'm getting
they're clear? It's just that they're not.
They're clear.
You just said
this section. Well, you just said this section is not clear. What do you mean they're clear?
If I said they're not clear, that's not what I meant, Sam. I said they're limited and they're very positive. They're only including.
Earlier in the discussion, you said there's some ambiguity in these documents.
Well, only in the sense that if you were just reading that one document and you weren't looking at Catholicism as a whole.
Oh, so wait a minute. I thought the documents were there to provide the clarity, and now I have to know the whole totality of the documents. That's why I brought up the 10,000 pages issue.
Well, I mean, I think if you speak to most Catholics, they wouldn't have read these documents at all.
Well, all that tells me is that they don't know their own position. So,
I think they do. I think
you said earlier.
You
said at the beginning of the conversation.
No. Francis with some Buddhists.
You said at the beginning. You said at the beginning of the conversation. That contradicts your statement at the beginning of the conversation that most Catholics don't know the dogmas.
No, they do. It's just like a part, in the DMs we were talking about,
Well, did you not say that most of them don't know this stuff? You said that at the beginning.
Yeah, most people do not have original thoughts.
No, you said most Catholics are not very smart.
So they
on
have
this.
to be a part of the church.
No, you said most Catholics are not very smart on these topics, and they don't know this stuff.
Yeah, like so that's when they need to be a part of a whole church, of a whole.
Okay, but that contradicts the claim that you just made.
That they're included in.
That contradicts the claim that you just made that most Catholics do know their faith.
Yeah, because like you get catechized and you're talking about stuff with people, and you see in the paper, oh look, there's a picture of Pope Francis, and he's with, you know, he's wearing like some Native American headgear or something. What's that about? You know, and so then you start talking about it with people. You know, is this priest saying this thing? I mean, your bishop says something and stuff like that. And so it's a very personal thing. It's like, is that when you're a part of a family? I was saying, like,
okay, yeah.
It's like if you're part of a family, the rules, the household rules, are not necessarily all written up on the wall.
All right.
But people know the rules.
Well,
what goes on
I mean, I think,
well, you're enculturated into it. You're enculturated.
Okay. But I don't see, and I understand what you're saying, that it's a holistic kind of a collective experience, and I believe that as Orthodox as well. Yes. But I don't see how that answers a lot of the questions that I brought up about ambiguity. I mean, we can leave that to the audience. Do you care if I move on to a different topic or a different question? We don't have to keep going. If you want to, if you need to go, you can go. If you want to stay, you can stay.
I might need to go soon. I mean,
okay.
I'll wait.
Let me ask this last question.
I'm happy to talk to you because it is interesting.
No, it's a great chat. I appreciate it. Let me ask you this last question, then you can answer it however long you want. Do you believe that, let's say it's 320 AD, before the Council of Nicaea, and let's say I live in Ephesus and I'm a Christian in Ephesus. There's not been an ecumenical council. I don't have access to Rome. Can I know what the faith is and what the true faith is and what the Catholic faith is if I've never been exposed to anything coming out of the Bishop of Rome in 320 AD before Nicaea?
I suppose that depends on, your relationship with the rest of the church. Like,
no, I mean, obviously, I'm joining the local church. I'm joining the church in Ephesus.
Yes. Okay. You're going there. You're there every Sunday. Let's say every holy day. If people are called to come together and
I know the faith and know the truth, but I've never had any exposure to what the Bishop of Rome is saying. Or an ecumenical council.
I mean, why not? Like, if you're a part of the church, I mean, according to your ability, your time, your energy.
So I've not had exposure to the Roman magisterium, and I can know the faith. So then, does the Roman magisterium, is it actually necessary?
Well, I'm assuming you know the faith. Like, if you've been baptized and all the rest of it, and you're a part of the church.
So the Roman magisterium isn't necessary as an epistemic principle, is my point.
Is what you're saying?
It's a very simple question.
Let's say of the truths, or I don't understand.
No, I'm just saying. All I have to do is use an example of somebody who's never been exposed to the quote Roman magisterium in the year 300 or 320 prior to Nicaea, and if they can know the faith and be catechized without knowing the magisterium, then the Roman magisterium is not necessary for the faith.
Well, I mean, not necessarily. Like, I was reading recently.
Can that person have certitude about? Can they have certitude about their beliefs and be grounded without knowing what Rome is talking about? It's a very. It should be. Okay.
I think you.
Okay.
So for instance, Saint Anselm, he was coming from England. He'd had no news whatsoever about, that the Pope had. I mean, for us it wouldn't seem that long ago, but for messages to get around Europe at that time, it took a very long time.
Right.
The Pope had said, right, no more lay investiture and this kind of thing. So Anselm's coming over. He's being asked to come over to have a dialogue with, Eastern brothers, what we'd understand as Orthodox. And so he was coming to talk about that. All of a sudden, in the middle of this, synod thing, the Pope says, oh yeah, so by the way, I'm going to be excommunicating the King of England,
Okay, well, I mean, this is a lot of political reframing of a very simple question that, I mean, I'm not being rude. I'm just saying, like, none of that really is relevant to the fact that, yeah, obviously a person can be catechized at a local church in Ephesus in 320 AD and have no knowledge of Rome or the Roman bishop or the magisterium, quote unquote, and be saved. This is prior to Nicaea. So no ecumenical councils.
Sorry to talk about, I think Anselm's attitude is interesting there, because he doesn't say, well, I guess, I never was an archbishop, or, something like that. Or, he's obviously very upset about the situation, but he was just like, oh, okay, I didn't know that this decision had now been made. And so I think that has a lot to do with the quote that you made at the very start when you opened and you spoke about the docility of Catholics. So like for someone like me, I have no authority in the church. In my household,
but this isn't really relevant to the individual's existential knowledge and certitude, which was what the point about the magisterium originally was. So I'm just saying that, look, if we admit, which it seems obvious that a person prior to Nicaea who has no access or knowledge of what's going on in Rome can know the faith and become certain and believe it. And if that's the case, then the magisterium isn't necessary.
Well, I would still say that it is, because this is like an organic thing we're talking about, to come with what, to what I was saying originally. I think that, problems with like libertarians, and to be frank, I think problems that ethnic Europeans have, who are just naturally very individualistic, is not being able to think corporately about human groups. So with something like the church, and speaking about the early church, we're talking about something that is like a baby. We're talking about something that is, still in the bud.
But I don't accept the premise of doctrinal development that, Vatican I itself says that the papacy was not a dogma or doctrine that developed. So look, I appreciate it. I think we're going to move on though. We can have, if you want to pop back on at any time. Any last words you want to say before we move on?
No. When you say move on, you mean move on to another topic, or?
No, I'm saying we're going to open it up beyond the Catholic topic to Protestants and Muslims and whatever else.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, no, just thanks for chatting.
It was a good chat. I appreciate you being civil and having the exchange.
No, it's nice. It's great to be able to speak with you. As I say, I've known of you for quite some time, so it's nice to be able to
let's
make a new friend and all that.
Hit me up and let's keep the chat going whenever you want.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And if you guys want to message him or follow him, he's linked below as Richard Story. Now I'm going to open it up if anybody wants to come on and chat. We don't have to restrict it to the Catholic papal issues. If you want to talk about Protestantism, if you want to talk about Arianism, Unitarianism, anything to do with Islam, Unitarian stuff would be good right now, because we have begun the lecture series going through the topics of Trinity in the Old Testament. Hey, Jamie? Could you make me a double shot and bring me out water? My mouth's really dry. Notice that we had a great civil conversation. Nobody got mad. Nobody lost their marbles. Storm the Cat, $10. Thank you so much for that super chat there. Mark says for $5, this is for the Trinity in the Law and the Prophets, Part 1. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Swad says for $10, someone made a video called something about ignorance. Can you respond to it? I don't think it's worth giving attention, but I appreciate the super chat there, Swad. So that was a good civil conversation. Nobody got mad. And in regard to what he's talking about with Francis, this video popped up from Buried Before Death over on Instagram, and this is what we're referring to. This is a it looks like an EWTN broadcast. So Francis recently had this meeting with Buddhists. Everybody sort of saw this. I think Tristan and other people shared the article that Francis was calling for more inclusivity and diversity in working with Buddhists, which is odd. Actually, it's not odd, but And then this, what appears to be a chanting prayer circle occurs with Francis apparently participating. I'll play it for you. And then it goes on to cite a couple ancient canons and St. Cyril about this. But this is also ultimately in the Sixth Ecumenical Council. It talks about you're excommunicated if you go into synagogues or mosques to pray, or the assemblies of heretics and schismatics. And I kid you not, there's Roman Catholics in the chat saying this doesn't count because a Buddhist isn't a schismatic. That's how crazy these people are. Yeah, but apparently you're not aware of the scriptures that point out that the gods of the nations are devils. Okay, so it's actually even worse to go and pray in this kind of a setting, because if you look at Mortalium Animos, which is the official encyclical condemning these types of operations, it's right here. It's called Mortalium Animos 1928 by Pius XI. If you look at what he says, he not only does he condemn any interfaith gatherings of this nature, he's talking about Christians. This is about Christian ecumenism, and when it popped off in the early 20th century, it was immediately condemned. Now, this is infinite light years beyond that, not just praying together and having religious ceremonies with Anglicans or Orthodox, right? This is going full Pachamama, full Buddhism, okay? There's no Mortalium Animos. Of course, they'll never go read it. The ones that do read it become trads, and then they get stuck in the trad box. The nightmare of the trad world, which is just a whole other level of contradictions. And the whole encyclical's point is that it's a huge scandal because it's indifferentism. If you go and pray with all these religions, it gives the impression that we all worship the same God. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's what Vatican II actually says. Right? So that's my argument. I think this is one of the strongest. It's not the only argument, but Mortalium Animos is one of the strongest because it's such a forceful condemnation of Christian inter-religious gatherings. It doesn't even think, it's not even in the mind of Pius XI that they would be doing this with the world religions. Right? So it's like a whole other level. If you want to support the discussion, you can do so via the super chats. But hey, look, see how civil that was? I mean, nobody even got like angry. And I mean, it doesn't even bother me if people are getting mad or feisty, right? Like that guy was totally civil, and we've been going back and forth in DMs. Tim and I were going back and forth in DMs today. Is anybody getting mad, losing their mind? No. But these like weird psycho 20-year-olds lose their mind and can't handle this stuff. They're like women. They can't control their emotions. And then they spam that I'm Skittles, that I'm an F word. They'll spam that I'm that. And then they're like, why'd you block me? So you spam at me all this nonsense, and then you wonder why I don't want to interact with you. Well, I'll tell you why. Titus 3, Paul says, reject the heretic after the first and second admonition, knowing that such a man is self-condemned. And so if people want to double down and be irrational and unreasonable, then why would, in fact, I'm told not to have any interactions with you. Martin, what's up, man? Go ahead and unmute, man. That Manuka helps, though. I'm going to have to start putting Manuka in every coffee because when I wake up, it's the allergies here. We live next to a swamp, dude. Why are you coughing? Because there's a swamp next door. And every morning when I wake up, it's like, but then if I put Manuka honey in the coffee, it's a lot better.